1964. Josephine Baker is entering her 58th year and triumphs on the Olympia stage. Josephine Baker is in the hearts of all the French. You have to know that since 1925, so it's been 40 years now that the French know Josephine Baker, love her, and follow what she does. The public is also fascinated by her family life in her Chateau de Milande. What they don't know, however, is that Josephine is in great difficulty.
My mother and the adults didn't tell us what was happening. So we only knew there was a problem, probably debts.
Les Milandes is quite a machinery, isn't it, in 1964?
It wasn't just the chateau. There was the whole village around it.
And she still created almost 120 jobs.
She had a lot of qualities, but she wasn't a businesswoman.
You cannot be an international star and manage a company with 120 employees.
The bailiffs are multiplying. Josephine is threatened with losing Les Milandes, so she does what we don't yet call a communication campaign.
Madam, what is happening to the Chateau de Milande? Isolation. And what are you planning to do?
I don't know.
I believe you have refused your friend's help until now. Will you accept it now?
I have no choice.
And how much money are you giving now?
I owe 200 million old francs.
Josephine is desperate, but she will receive totally unexpected help.
On June 4th, 1964, Brigitte Bardot appears on the 9 p.m. news.
So when she comes on TV, naturally everyone is in front of the small screen.
Brigitte Bardot, you're the one who told us. I want to come see you to do something, to say something. What exactly?
Yes, that's right. I'm here to talk to you about what's happening to Josephine Baker right now. Personally, I find it heart-wrenching, and we all need to do something for her. I'm asking each of you today to do everything you can to help Josephine Baker.
She's announcing that she sent her a check of 100,000 francs, which was a lot of money back then. And she's asking the French people to donate to save the Milandes.
Brigitte Bardot made this appeal without even knowing my mother personally. I think it's because both of them shared humanistic ideals. Besides animal rights, Brigitte Bardot didn't know that my mother also advocated for animal causes. They both had the same ideas, but without knowing each other. That's why my mother was quite surprised.
As shown by her reaction, aired on TV the day after Brigitte Bardot's plea.
I believe this woman has been very brave in her life and has always been very generous. Right now, we can't leave her in this situation.
Josephine, you just heard Brigitte Bardot. How did that make you feel?
If you allow me, Brigitte Bardot, I want to humbly say from the bottom of my motherly heart how grateful I am. And I send you a big hug.
After that, many letters started arriving at the Milandes with small amounts of money and words of encouragement.
People from all over the world will donate money.
Notably, it's Princess Farah Diba who will help, and Princess Grace of Monaco, and these people will help enormously by sending real checks.
After Brigitte Bardot, Josephine also received support from the President of the Republic.
General de Gaulle personally involved a bank that proposed buying the estate and giving Josephine a chateau in another region of France. No way.
I believe it was Trigano, Gilbert Trigano, who proposed turning the Chateau de Milan into a sort of Mediterranean club where she would keep the use of the chateau.
Trigano offered her the usufruct of the estate until her death, and then the entire estate would be turned into a club. And she said, at that point, what will my children become? She refused, and she lost everything.
Here we are in front of the Chateau de Milande. which until last night was owned by Josephine Baker.
In February 1968, an auction is coming.
The chateau will be sold for a pittance, reportedly 10% of its value.
Everything was divided into lots and sold at a discount. That is, all those who bought the lots separately agreed not to outbid each other. Basically, to share the spoils.
They totally scammed her. It's not right that a chateau of this size and a tourist enterprise is worth only 900,000 francs of that time.
That's about 1 million euros. On the day of the sale, a surprise benefactor was supposed to intervene. It was Bruno Coquatrix, director of the Olympia. Josephine was counting on him to save her chateau. She also sent her eldest son, Akio, to the scene.
Mom told me over the phone, Akio, I can't be there. You have to attend the sale. And it was Bruno Coquatrix who was supposed to bring a check. So we went to Bergerac. Mr. Coquatrix showed up. He was there. But he never went in to place the check on the judge's desk and stop the sale.
This U-turn caused quite a stir.
In fact, he didn't lift a finger, even though there were very few bids. That's what's incomprehensible.
He meant well. He advised her to move on and start a new life elsewhere. And she never forgave him for that. Never.
In 1968, the loss of Les Milans seemed inevitable. Josephine made one last attempt.
The judge allowed her to re-enter her castle because it was just before the winter truce.
She will only get a few months' reprieve that she will try to extend as much as possible. She returns home, convinced she can stay, and barricades herself. She locks herself in the kitchen with canned food. She resists.
Oh well, we're in the room I like the least. Both good and bad memories. This is where Mom took refuge when she lost and realized the castle was really sold. You should know there wasn't a castle. There was no electricity, and it was the only place where she could get a bit warm. The owner, Mr. Jolie Anna Hummard, wanted to get his property back. He asked a few young people to do it for him. When they went inside, in the kitchen, they grabbed her. The cook was there. She must have clung on here to resist. Once they detached Mom from the cook. They had to throw her out, get her out of the house, so they went through this door. It's the only door here. Can you imagine? They threw her out. So they must have dumped her somewhere around here and set her up here. They threw a blanket over her and left because they must have been chased off by the neighbors. There was a photographer who was there and took the famous photo.
She calls a photographer she knows, a young one who lives in Corrèze, not far from Brive. He takes his car quickly and he's the one who photographs her, in almost a bathrobe. We don't recognize her. She's completely changed.
It hurts to see Josephine like a beggar, miserable, tired, sick, under support.
It was a terrible image for most of us.
For her, it's a psychological collapse that leads to a huge trauma. She doesn't recognize anyone for a few days, and she goes to the hospital in Périgueux at that moment.
She arrived with nothing in France, and she left Périgord with nothing. The circle was complete.
The adventures of Josephine Baker begin on June 3, 1906, in the United States, in Missouri.
She was born in St. Louis, which is a former French trading post. It is on the Mississippi, so it seems to be a very pleasant city with a lot of hope for this family.
In this photo, Josephine is 18 months old, and her mom calls her Tumpy, maybe because of her pretty cheeks. She grows up in an area reserved for black people.
In reality, it's very hard to find a job.
The street where she lives is in a ghetto. At night, the whole family sleeps on the same flea-infested mattress. Head to tail to have a bit more space. So when it's cold in the winter, there are no blankets, so we wrap ourselves in newspapers.
She is in a poor family with a father she never knew, who was white and just passing through, and a mother who raised her. So, we're in an America where being black and poor means being at the very bottom of the social ladder.
His mother remarried. 2 other children came along.
Her mother's second husband was an awful guy who didn't work much, drank, and didn't like Josephine because she wasn't his daughter.
She grows up, but her mother cannot raise her and keep her at home. One day, Josephine must work. Her mother places her with people who treat her poorly.
She sends Josephine to a Madame Kaiser, who is very scary, who is nice at first, but then turns out to be a terrible woman, making her do menial tasks and locking her in the cellar of her house. She sleeps on a straw mattress next to a dog, and one day, Josephine unfortunately makes a mistake in the kitchen, and Madame Kaiser throws her hand right into a pot of boiling water. And there, for her, it was atrocious.
Josephine holds on, grits her teeth, and finds some comfort in the streets of Saint Louis, brought to life by dance.
With Josephine, the dance bug started very early. She dances, she moves around, she doesn't learn at all. She is not a ballerina at all. Josephine is a natural dancer.
She likes to create small shows in her mother's basement, and everyone brings a little something to congratulate her, to pay her for the show she gives. She goes down the basement stairs with lighting. She already has this little theatrical side that will reveal itself later. In fact, theatre is a bit, for her, a kind of oxygen bubble and a bubble of zest for life.
And she really needs it. Because beyond the poverty, Josephine must also endure the segregation, then in effect in her country.
It is an extremely important context of racial discrimination. The development of far-right movements that are extremely violent in the United States, the Ku Klux Klan planting bombs, etc. And for Josephine Baker, it is a very difficult situation.
Mixed race, too white for her family, too black for the whites. She is only 11 years old when one of the bloodiest riots in United States history breaks out in her city.
In 1917, everything changes. We see terrified people fleeing the neighborhood in flames because the neighborhood has been set on fire, and people cross the St. Louis Bridge to take refuge on the other shore. And there, she is with her mom. Her grandmother, whom she was close to, and her aunt talked to her a lot about the Racine. So, she heard about it, but now, she is living it. She sees
even friends' parents from school getting killed like animals.
There was a real slaughter, a real massacre. There were about 6,000 homeless, about 200 killed. It was a pogrom.
After these tragic events, Josephine has only one dream in mind: to leave to become an artist, even if it means forcing her destiny.
She goes not far from her home, to the Booker Washington Theater, a venue for shows. She asks to meet the director. Bluffing works. The director is moved by this young girl who wants to perform.
He has never seen someone dance like that. For him, she thinks to herself, I'm learning it. And so it is the beginning of her artistic adventure. She is just 13 years old. 13 years, a pivotal age for Josephine, who leaves school and gets married for the first time.
Everything is good for changing life.
So she is ready to accept anything, and we are not going to offer her to be the star of a show. But she tells herself, if this is the way to leave, I'll say yes. So she says yes to anything to leave, and she will very quickly find herself in Philadelphia.
And then, she will marry Willie Baker in a second marriage, so that is the name she will keep all her life. But obviously, the marriage will not last. Josephine does not see herself as a housewife. She needs excitement, she needs adventure.
The young girl decides to try her luck in New York. In the early 1920s, the City of Light is bustling, and a certain crowd is indulging in the black cabarets of Broadway.
And in New York, she absolutely wants to join Shuffle Along, which was an extraordinary review, but obviously she is too young. She was 15 years old.
So she made herself look older. She told them, No, I am 17 years old. And she got hired.
She'll just be a little dresser. She doesn't like that at all. Then one evening, there's a problem in the troupe. A pregnant dancer can't go on stage. And Josephine says, I know the show. I can go. That's Josephine. When she can't get through the door, she goes through the window. And she gets on stage, and instead of doing the planned act, she dances and makes faces.
She surprised everyone with her humor, her way of crossing her eyes, her way of dancing.
And the true Josephine Baker was born that night in this show, Shuffle Along. And then she finds a job in a small cabaret, also reserved for black people, the Plantation. In this cabaret, where she dances every evening, she is noticed one day by a woman from France, Caroline Dudley.
This woman, whose parents have a lot of money, is a producer, and she is looking for black artists for a big show in Paris that will be called the Revue Negre, a title that at that time is not considered discriminatory.
When the two directors of the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées decide to stage the so-called Nègre Revue, for them, there is not an ounce of racism in that word. Nègre art has developed since the beginning of the century, and Nègre art is the noblest, the most beautiful there is.
This word is synonymous with music, African art, and Negro art, which is fashionable at the time in Paris.
Today, obviously, if you say the word nègre in France, it's a scandal. But back then, it was extremely common.
And soon, another word will appear to promote the culture and values of people of color. The word for black people.
It is a word that applies to everything that comes from Africa.
One could say that Josephine Baker was ahead of negritude. Why? Because we have looked at negritude through its prominent intellectuals, like Aimé Césaire, like Léopold Sédar Senghor, etc. But in reality, Josephine Baker did not need to have read to try to show that there was a struggle. And we will see this struggle in the background throughout her life.
The Negro Revue, if it's sold like that, it's because it's known to be something that would attract in the fashion of the time, because it's known that jazz came with the American soldiers in 18, that there are many black people who play jazz, and Parisians adore them. All the intellectuals of the time, like Cocteau and Fernand Léger, were completely crazy, let's say, about this black art.
And Josephine, much to her surprise, is hired for this show.
On September 15th, 1925, Josephine boards the ocean liner Berengaria, heading to Europe and Paris.
They arrive at the station in Paris. All this group, nothing but black people. Josephine gets off the train, and there, a white person smiles at her. So for her, that is an exceptional welcome. She is captivated by this Paris that welcomes her.
She is fascinated by this scenery, by this city, by these buildings, by the Champs-Élysées. But above all, she walks freely, which for her is a first. In New York, a black person is not free to walk.
Josephine Baker is going to make her debut at the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées, Avenue Montaigne. Built in 1913, it is one of the first Art Deco buildings in France, designed entirely in concrete by the architect Auguste Perret. To create the sets, he called upon the best artists of the time: Antoine Bourdelle for the facade and sculptures, René Lalique for the chandeliers, and Maurice Denis for the dome. In the early 1920s, the theater is in trouble. Its shows, too elitist, no longer attract crowds. The director, André Devin, is therefore expecting a lot from the Revue Negre.
During the very first rehearsals, André Davin was absolutely not convinced by what this troupe offered him. He imagined something very exotic and very wild, and they offered him something very tame. André Davin will rely on Jacques Charles, who will review everything from A to Z, from the score to the various scenes.
Jacques Charles, King of Europe, producer at the Moulin Rouge, immediately notices Josephine, who was only hired as a chorus singer. He creates the final tableau for her. In an era that praises the French colonial empire, she must embody a wild and naked exoticism.
He asks Josephine Baker to take off her top and dance topless. And Josephine Baker does not agree at all. She retorts that the African Americans from St. Louis are very modest and that dancing topless is out of the question. She locks herself in her dressing room. She refuses to come out. She is in tears. And finally, it is Paul Collin, the poster artist, who manages to convince her to return to the stage by telling her it's nothing. Breasts are like buttocks. In the end, everyone has them. But for her, it will make her famous. And she agrees.
Josephine Baker thus becomes the lover and muse of the painter Paul Collin. He sketches her at every opportunity in his albums, as well as on the poster of the show that will make them famous. On October 2nd, 1925, all of Paris is in the hall for the grand premiere.
She goes all out. She's the wild one with some kind of loincloth around her waist. She rolls her eyes. She makes faces with her mouth. She bursts out with her loud laughter.
Then comes the final scene, the wild dance. Josephine appears in an erotic duo, a fantasy of colonial society about African populations.
People make fun of the way white French people view the good little Negro banania in the Revue Negre.
In the room, boos mix with cheers.
She is the illustration of the African who descends from his tree, quote unquote, and for others, she is precisely a slap to all the colonialists by saying, "We will show you the caricature of what you think an African is."
Paris is divided in two between those who will hate it and others who will say it brings a new art, a new way of dancing.
And the next day, the Revue Negre is sold out, and the reviews are said to be rave. They talk about a new star being born. They talk about the Ebony Venus. That's how they nickname the Queen of the Wild Dance.
An 18-year-old queen who does as she pleases. After a triumphant tour in Europe, she leaves the Revue Negre and signs up with Paul Derval at the Folies Bergère. He makes her his new star in the current craze.
La Folie du Jour, like all the revues at Folies Bergère, is a grand spectacle with lavish scenes and settings. Paul Derval spared no expense. He had a ball of flowers built in the set, a ball that weighs 1 ton. So it goes through a ladder, this ball opens, she goes inside, then this ball closes, it descends onto the stage, the ball opens again.
With a mirror that allows Josephine's legs to reflect when she dances the Charleston. She only moved her whole body and spoke with her eyes. She spoke with her mouth, without a word. That's Josephine. That's what is expected of her in this Paris of the 1920s.
This is a time when the Parisian Revue is an industry, with its hundreds of set designers, costumers, and feather workers. In Paris, Maison Février is one of the last feather workshops still in operation. Most of Josephine's costumes there were embellished. How does this reproduction of one of its headdresses testify? Made of egret feathers as fragile as glass.
From afar, the majesty of the feather, we need it. We need it for the visuals. The dancers must be adorned, armed. They are even armed. They have headpieces, structures that are over 2 meters. It has a graphic effect, a lightness effect, and an incredible presence that no material, no support, can offer instead of the feather. A review. Without feathers, it is not a review. It's part of the stylistic codes of the review.
At Folies Bergère, Josephine trades her feathers for another accessory, the banana belt.
The banana, of course, is the symbol of the forest, the jungle, where, in theory, Josephine Baker comes from.
Moreover, the bananas were pointing upwards. Conveniently, it had to be erotic and
She
sexy.
pulls in her stomach. She sticks out her buttocks. It almost seems like she's not following the music, as some might say, but that the music bursts forth from her body.
She does not present herself as a little woman, a poor woman whom people come to see to perform an erotic dance. No, she shows that she is capable of seducing her audience, of directing them as she wishes. She asserts her personality and establishes herself in the world of entertainment.
Josephine quickly becomes indispensable, and her elastic body inspires the greatest artists of the Roaring Twenties.
It feels like she is a magnet, attracting both the world of arts, painters, writers, and sculptors who wanted to sculpt her.
She inspired Cocteau, who was a fan of hers. She inspired Man Ray, who took many photos with her and is said to have been her lover, which is possible.
She had Georges Simenon as her secretary. Picasso charmed her. Le Corbusier chased after her.
Mingwei also knew her in pre-war Paris, and he says she was the most extraordinary woman he had ever met in his life.
In this decade where the youth tries to forget the Great War, Josephine embodies the new Parisian, a liberated young woman with her elegant outfits and short hair. In short, a fashion icon.
Since she was a personality who made headlines and was extremely popular, even if scandalous, everyone wanted to follow her. It was the time of short hair, and it was Josephine Baker who started it, with hair slicked back and very short. She really fit into that era.
Lanvin, Poiret, Dior, all the great Parisian couturiers want to dress Josephine. What inspires them is also this dance, originating from the black communities in the southern United States, which she introduced in France, the Charleston.
Josephine is somewhat the symbol of carefree abandon with her Charleston dance, with her way of moving.
To move well, you need tailored outfits. In Paris, the Palais Galliera preserves some of the dancing dresses created by designers Lelong, Pateau, and Lanvin.
The dancing dress is distinguished primarily by the richness of the embroidery that sometimes creates trompe-l'oeil jewelry. This is very evident on this dress by Lucien Lelong, where there is a kind of trompe-l'oeil belt. And the dancing dress is obviously characterized by fringes, flowing panels. The godehers, sometimes the pleats, which allow for dancing the new dances like the Charleston or the black bottom.
The Charleston dancer, thus adorned, is considered too androgynous by some observers of the time.
Colette sarcastically mentions that the splendor of Byzantium parades on tense young boys, criticisms also shared by Paul Poiret, who compares women to underfed little telegraph operators.
Josephine Baker, in any case, started a trend and continues to captivate.
Josephine is 20 years old, and she is the Queen of Paris thanks to her looks, it's true, thanks to her personality. Personality, as the Americans say, thanks to her energy.
Josephine, she realizes that she is very successful with men. And then she tells herself that white men are handsome as black men. Therefore, she will have many adventures.
My mother was certainly a liberated woman, very liberated, especially before the war. I knew the mom who was more conservative. Sex, no comment, no details about her past life. But at that age, 19, 20 years old, especially when you are famous, one might have reasons to indulge, to give in, and then to have a great time.
She lived fully with whatever came her way, and she was right to do so.
In 1926, Josephine has a significant encounter. An Italian businessman whom she calls Pepito.
But who calls himself Count Giuseppe Abatino? An Italian count? No. He was not an Italian count at all. He pretended to be an Italian count. It looks much better on invitation cards, on letterheads, to be Count Pepito Abatino. He is dressed in a truly very elegant way, with tailor-made suits. He has a small mustache. His hair is very neatly slicked down.
Pepito fell madly in love, and with him, Josephine's career quickly took on a whole new dimension. Because this Sicilian lover has obvious talents for marketing. He first wants to make the name Baker a brand, and is full of ideas.
He is going to develop Josephine Baker dolls, rag dolls. He will create the Baker fix to hold the hair in place so it doesn't move. And they open Chez Joséphine at 40 Rue Fontaine, coincidentally in the music hall district. That way, as soon as people leave the music hall, they catch them on Rue Fontaine at Chez Joséphine, and there they finish the night. The profession of manager does not exist, and there is a certain Mr. Pepito who will claim he invented the word manager.
He made him earn a lot of money.
Abatino is the creator of show business.
Under his guidance, Josephine goes back on tour at the end of the Roaring Twenties. Each of her appearances draws crowds, but everything is not rosy. The criticisms pour in, and they are tinged with the xenophobia spreading in Europe at the time, particularly in Austria in 1928.
Vienna was extremely puritanical. It was an extremely Catholic, uptight city. So, to see this wild, black, naked woman who was going to perform on stage, it was like the devil, you know? It was not possible. Her case was even discussed in the assembly to decide whether to accept Josephine or not.
We're even going to ring the bell to say, "Red alert, don't go see this girl naked on stage." Careful, don't go see the devil, you know. Josephine is the devil.
Josephine hears the criticism, and instead of coming on stage undressed, she will come with a tight black dress all the way up to the neck, and she will sing blues. And that's where it ends.
For the clergy and those who oppose the arrival of Josephine Baker, the insult is severe. All these experiences that Josephine Baker will go through during the 1930s will shape her personality. The more she was attacked, the more she was stimulated, and the more she fought to put on extraordinary shows. And the audience kept asking for more.
Nestled in Pepito's loving arms, Josephine feels protected and enjoys all the success offers her. Together, they live the high life.
She drives luxury cars. She has several cars. Even to please Pepito, one day she brings back a third one. Nobody has 3 cars in the 1920s. But Josephine, yes, she has 140 pairs of shoes. When she goes on tour, there are trunks that follow her. They make a whole train to carry all those trunks.
The 1930s were the most prosperous years for Josephine and her career.
In 1929, the couple moved to the chic suburbs of Paris, to Vézinay. The Villa Beauchesne is huge, 15 rooms, luxurious decoration, and an elegant English-style park.
It's a very beautiful home, but money doesn't matter to her. She's generous. She invites everyone. She throws beautiful parties. In the park, she hosts concerts. She organizes concerts. It's constant festivities. But it's not ostentation. It's her natural way of life.
Josephine is generous by nature, with her friends, but also with the less fortunate. Charities can count on her to, for example, distribute food.
People had a lot of affection for her because she was so approachable. She would have dinner at her electrician's house, eating pasta on the oilcloth with them. Josephine is a very simple person.
Far from the social scene, Josephine longs for a life close to nature. She gardens in her greenhouses, surrounded by her dogs and chickens, but she doesn't limit herself to pets. Pepito Abatino understood that to last, Josephine must become much more than a dancer. On his advice, she first started an acting career and even shared the bill with Jean Gabin. Then, when she embarks on a new revue in 1930, it is again about innovating, about surprising. On the poster for Paris qui remue, Josephine appears alongside her famous cheetah, given to her by Henri Varnat, master of the Paris Casino. A leading place of entertainment, once an amusement park, then an ice rink, before its transformation into a theater in 1891. It is the cradle of modern revues. People dance, perform, and sing there, and they descend the grand staircase.
It seems trivial like that, but going downstairs like that with the gear we have on our shoulders, the high heels, the thing, it's complicated. So, being a review leader was complicated because you had to manage all these aspects. Manage the team, manage the artistic side, and manage the physical side. That's why there were so few of them, because you needed to have all those qualities. A review is inherently very popular. You have magic, you have fall, you have attraction, you have music, you have pretty girls. These are themes that are very unifying. It's a mix of everything we ultimately want to see in a spectacular form.
At the Casino de Paris, Josephine Baker discovers her transformation. Pepito now encourages her to sing.
He wanted to handle the publishing for the songs, the work of the authors and composers. He was creating Josephine Baker editions.
One hit left to find.
The problem: 3 days before the start of the show, there is no song, no hit song. They call for help from Vincent Scotto and J.O. Koje, the trendy writers. They come, they think, they look for a song, and then, in front of the Casino de Paris, they write a song that they immediately present to Josephine, which she rehearses, without imagining that her verses are going to travel around the world. It's called J'ai deux amours.
It's a song that declares the love of an American woman and an African-American woman for Paris. Obviously, the Parisian audience, who will be the first to hear this song, can only be charmed by someone who says, "I come from elsewhere and I love Paris." She is asked to sing a French song, to act French. She does it even with her American accent. And that adds a little something extra.
And this song will become her emblem until the end of her life. She will sing this song all over the world.
Josephine gives more than 300 performances at the Casino de Paris, a triumph that makes her long for America. She flies to the United States in 1936, 11 years after her departure, hoping to conquer Broadway.
Pepito lands a contract at the Ziegfeld Follies, the big hall in New York. She is happy. She leaves. But upon arrival, it's a disappointment.
There, she is somewhat brought down by American critics who are like, yes, it's Josephine Baker, who is a big name in France and Europe, who is even a star. What does she have that our artists don't? She has nothing exceptional.
She did not have the success she expected and encountered the same discrimination she hadn't experienced since being in Europe. Like entering through the front door, not sitting at the same time as whites, not being served in restaurants, etc.
It's a complete fiasco. She decides to leave. It's despair. She considers herself finished in the United States, and Pepito pays the price. Everything that happened is his fault. And when Josephine is angry, she doesn't change her mind, and she kicks Pepito out overnight. He returns to France alone.
He passed away at the end of September 1936. He was very sick, and he had actually hidden his illness from her. Josephine is still going to be very sad about Pepito's death and will regret abandoning him for the rest of her life.
After Pepito's death, Josephine starts a new life with a young industrialist, Jean Léon, whose family made a fortune in sugar. She marries him in November 1937.
For her, Jean Léon was the right society. It really meant being among the proper people.
Josephine thinks she has found her Prince Charming. Alas, the dream is short-lived. Shortly after her wedding, she finally becomes pregnant, but loses the child. Heartbroken, the couple separates. The only consolation is that this union allowed her to acquire French nationality as a snub to this America that refuses her.
For her, it's still very important. She becomes this French citizen. This France that he accepted, for her, it was crucial to be almost a child of the country. So this nationality is a gift from heaven for Josephine.
She doesn't have two loves by chance. Paris is France. It is her country. And during the resistance, she will constantly proclaim it.
When the Second World War begins, Josephine Baker is 33 years old, and she doesn't hesitate for a second.
As soon as the war breaks out in September 1939, they are French, patriots. It's their land being violated, and they are ready for anything.
She knows that the war is at the gates of Paris, and so for her, it is impossible not to give her life for France.
Josephine's commitment to this France that has just adopted her has left concrete traces recorded in the historical archives of the defense at the Château de Vincennes.
The Historical Service of Defense keeps all the records of all French army officers since the early 19th century. Josephine Baker is no exception since she is a second lieutenant in the Air Force. So she has a file here. In fact, she even has two. Since here we have her resistance file because Josephine Baker will actually begin her action in World War II in hiding, and her military personnel file, which is more precisely her career file, and which bears her name. While many artists are content with doing tours at the front, she wanted to go further by offering to serve as a cover for counter-espionage activities. That is to say, Josephine Baker was approached by the 2nd Bureau of the General Staff, which is in charge of counter-espionage, to become, as seen in these documents, an HC, meaning an honorable correspondent.
Or intelligence officer. Josephine is thus led to enter the service of one of his shadow soldiers, a certain Mr. Aptet, with a somewhat changing first name.
My father had been in counter-espionage service against Germany since 1936, mostly in Paris. His name was Maurice Léonard. Just before the war, or in any case in 1939, he had adopted the first name Jacques.
Jacques Aptet, sometimes a captain, sometimes a commander. At first glance, nothing suggested that his path would cross that of Josephine.
And they met through artistic circles.
At the beginning, Captain Aptet wasn't very keen because he remembered Mata Hari, the artists. They're not reliable people, all that.
Jacques Aptet does not see how a woman like that can be useful to intelligence.
She meets him and she will say to him, "There you go, sir. I want to give myself to France. Do with me what you want."
He will completely fall for Josephine's personality and especially her commitment.
They detected a particular ability and thought she could very well gather information through her intelligence.
Why is Josephine Baker an interesting target for counterespionage services? It's because she has access to high society. This allows the general staff to monitor what is being said behind the scenes in Parisian high society.
And what is being said is not without importance.
Starting from 1940, it can be seen that, as the Army notes, she provides information on the possibility of Italy entering the war, on Japan's policy, or on German agents in Paris.
She simultaneously uses her role as a big musical star to meet people. And while doing so, we think we are receiving the star, but we don't know that behind the star hides the intelligence agent of French counter-espionage.
Jacques Apté quickly understands that Josephine can be useful on several fronts.
He will integrate it into the toy section of the IPSA. The IPSA are the air aid nurse pilots. Because you should know that Josephine has her pilot's license. She is integrated into this toy section, so she is supposed to collect toys for families, military, for children. At the same time, of course, she gathers information.
During the phony war, Josephine does not forget her profession as an artist, which she continues to practice in a Parisian revue.
She performs in this Paris-London revue with Maurice Chevalier.
It will not be easy between the two. They had an 18-year age difference.
And we will send both of them to the Maginot Line.
We need people, artists, to lift the spirits of the troops a bit. You can see her kissing some soldiers on the forehead, touching the beards of others.
Josephine has fun, charms the troops. Maurice Chevalier, on the other hand, grimaces.
Maurice Chevalier really wanted to perform in the second part.
He doesn't want to be seen as the one who warms up the audience for Josephine Baker.
Except what happened to Maurice Chevalier was that the audience of French soldiers, the grunts, gave such a success, so many encores to my mother in the first part, that his second part was curtailed.
When it's his turn to come on stage, he's not listened to at all, and then people ask for Josephine Baker again.
Maurice Chevalier will resent him to death. They will mutually hate each other.
June 1940. At the time of the debacle, discord is set aside. Josephine Baker makes a radical decision.
Josephine Baker refuses to continue her musical activities in Paris. She does not want to sing. She does not want to dance in front of the Germans, in front of those who occupy her country.
Many artists will flee to the United States, or sing for the occupier, or even make films for Continental Films, created by Goebbels in 1940. Josephine is therefore a unique case.
For a few months, she has been renting a property in Dordogne, and it is the Château des Mélandes. She has the opportunity, after this debacle, to go on vacation to her Château des Mélandes.
Interestingly, she not only stays in contact, but brings along her handler, Captain or Commander Jacques Apté. He becomes Jacques Hébert, the artistic secretary and impresario of Josephine Baker, who accompanies her on her tours.
They were asked to leave, to move away from Paris, to avoid being caught in Paris, not knowing exactly how they would be treated by the Germans who knew of their existence.
At the chateau, when Josephine arrives, she comes with her entire menagerie in a very beautiful white convertible car. She has to play the star. She is the star of Paris in the 1930s. But that's good because it's a great cover for her. No one suspects for a moment that Josephine Baker is a spy.
And that it now occupies a strategic location, close to the demarcation line drawn by the Germans.
The castle of the Milans is in the free zone, so she understands that there is a strategy. There is something very interesting to play for the resistance.
A castle. That's the perfect place when one is keen, like Josephine, to help those fleeing occupied France.
This cellar was the perfect place to hide people, weapons, or whatever, like equipment. Why? Because it was probably cluttered with a lot of things. It's a cellar. But at the same time, the big advantage of this cellar is that there was a passage. So you have a staircase that goes back up to the outside, but at the same time, you have a small tunnel. It led out a little way to the river or even to the other side. But this tunnel could perfectly serve to hide people.
She helps them cross the demarcation line and hides them.
The Milanese became the refuge for the first resistance fighters.
Friends and relatives who are either Jewish or communists.
Among them, Josephine's former husband, Jean Léon.
She was divorced from Jean Léon. She hides him because he is Jewish. Her entire family, thanks to her connections, she got them to Brazil.
But Josephine's activities do not go completely unnoticed, even in the free zone.
There's a little story. Our neighbor, Mr. Mallory, was part of the resistance, and one day the Germans showed up.
When the Germans arrive, they say, "But madam, we are looking for Mr. Mallory." And she, with a strong American accent, makes them believe that she understood it was the town hall. So always with her spontaneity, her way of charming people.
It must be said that Mom on that day was hiding the famous Mr. Mallory with other people in the castle's cellars where we currently are. But since she was very well known, and most certainly the officer commanding the troop must have been an admirer, Mom invited him, and they had coffee.
She tries to put on a brave face. She's going to put on a show for them because she's Josephine Baker, and she knows how to do that. She tells herself, "I have only one weapon at my disposal," making them laugh.
Pipey stayed here hidden, while she socialized with those gentlemen from Merlesh.
And they ended up sinking them, you know. But not without having searched the castle first.
She could really have had big problems given what she was hiding there, given what was happening there.
She still had that courage because it wasn't very simple.
November 1940. A few months after the armistice signed by France, the Melendez are no longer safe. Josephine must absolutely flee.
It's Captain Apte and the higher-ups who will tell him, "Warning now, red alert, you must go."
And at that moment, she was sent to North Africa. She went through Algiers first and then went to Morocco. She was wonderfully welcomed in Morocco by the royal family, who were, of course, sympathetic to the enemies of Nazism.
From Morocco, Josephine and Jacques Apte are supposed to transmit, via Portugal, documents intended for Free France, established in London after General de Gaulle's call on 18th June 1940. But from the first trip, everything gets complicated. First, Jacques Apte must step aside.
The German intelligence services had completely infiltrated North Africa. He has to carry out a mission in Portugal. He realizes he can't get his visa to conduct his mission. He is forced to let Josephine Baker go, but Josephine Baker gets her visa without any problems.
She is going to send documents and plans to the resistance in London, which she conveys on sheet music with invisible ink or with papers hidden in her bodice. Because, of course, at customs, they don't search Josephine. They ask her for autographs.
Mission accomplished. Josephine returns to Morocco, but she is exhausted. Very quickly, her health deteriorates, and in June 1941, she also has to stop her activities.
An acute peritonitis that will develop and create other problems. She will spend 19 months between the hospital and recovery. She was borderline dying.
Josephine only recovers thanks to an event that will change the course of the war.
It's around the end of 1942, and at that moment, Josephine learns that the Americans are going to land in Casablanca.
The British and the Americans landed in North Africa to break the Mediterranean route to Hitler, and also to have a rear base for future operations to liberate Europe.
For her, it's extraordinary. She says to herself, "But I want to go sing for the troops."
In addition, an American landing, can you imagine, for the little American girl. And she's proud of her country again.
She awaited the Allies like one awaits Jesus Christ, the Savior. And she sees an army arriving divided. There are blacks on one side, whites on the other. And Josephine Baker does not understand. She does not understand and points to herself. saying, "Is this what we're going to fight Hitler with?"
Blacks attending Josephine's show is out of the question. And then, Josephine, determined, says enough is enough. I want blacks and whites in the audience.
Finally, the American command decided to merge the two armies, the white and the black, together, and Josephine Baker returned to sing for both.
Josephine fights while she can barely stand. Against her doctor's advice, she resumes performing galas in Morocco and soon in Algeria.
Josephine, she knows she is behind General de Gaulle. That's all that matters to her, and she will spread the good word across North Africa for General de Gaulle.
For Josephine Baker, it is essential to sing for the Allied troops and for the people who will welcome her. So she decides with Captain Apte to go on a propaganda tour. This involves taking a jeep and driving almost 3,000 kilometers with it.
She traveled the kilometers. She went to Egypt, Syria, Lebanon.
These were very long crossings on dangerous tracks. There were mines everywhere, apparently. There were some areas that were cleared of mines, but if you strayed from these tracks, you risked exploding.
They were all exposed to an unexpected enemy attack, or an ambush, or things like... She was in it with the jeeps and the military.
Upon arrival in Lebanon, she unfortunately witnesses one of the 4 people who had been with her for a while, a young soldier, step on a landmine 50 meters in front of her.
And she never wanted to be paid. She refused any salary because it was her duty.
So she raised funds, which she never hesitated to distribute very widely, since she kept practically nothing for herself, which sometimes caused problems for both her and my father, if only for transportation, because they couldn't afford to pay for fuel, and they often skipped meals.
Josephine Baker's role is actually financial. Her concerts are not just for troop morale. They also help raise funds. Free France, it must be understood, from its inception, is a survivalist army. The Free French define themselves as an army of hobos. Why? Because there is no one behind them. A country capable of providing them with enough material and financial resources to wage war.
Give everything to Free France, to the soldiers, to the armies.
One cannot imagine the amount Josephine was able to gather through her galas in the Middle East.
After the war, the army will estimate it at about 10 million francs of that time, which is obviously considerable.
A star of that level doing what she was able to do during those times in terms of volunteer work and commitment alongside France, for General de Gaulle is totally unprecedented.
To the point that the French army will officially welcome Josephine as a saint.
The Air Force was heavily criticized in June 1940 for its supposed inefficiency. Having Josephine Baker with you is part of a public relations policy aimed at liberation.
What's fabulous is that up until now, she is part of the army, but not really part of it since she doesn't have the rank yet. And there, in 1944, she will be made a second lieutenant in the women's troops of the Air Force. She will stop her counter-espionage activities to move more towards humanitarian tasks.
But as usual, Josephine will give it her all, even if it means risking her life again.
On June 6, 1944, the day of the Normandy landings, Josephine Baker is on tour, in the service of the liberation authorities. She therefore takes the Air Liaison Group to go to Corsica. 80 kilometers from the Corsican coast, the aircraft Goéland is forced to make an emergency water landing due to engine problems. Luckily for Josephine Baker and the crew of this aircraft, a detachment of Senegalese riflemen is present off the coast and will be able to rescue her. This can be seen in the illustrations.
Illustrations gathered in a document reserved exclusively for Air Force officers, the logbook.
An exceptional fact for a military document, Josephine Baker, now once again a musical star and civilian in 1946, comes to autograph this document. We can see her signature here.
In the evening of the war, Josephine's health remains fragile, but she is happy. At her side, a new companion, her conductor, Jo Bouillon, and on her chest, decorations, Resistance Medal, Free France Medal. All she lacks is the Legion of Honor, which will long remain debated.
People of honor must have either been injured or lost a direct relative.
Josephine Baker did not receive any injury inflicted by the enemy, so the question arises about the military nature of these acts. Rescue acts, espionage acts, is that military action?
There are those who cannot stand that a black woman and then an international artist is rewarded in a way that matches what she has accomplished.
The case is going to get bogged down, and it takes a minister in 1957, Jacques Chaban-Delmas, to decide to dig up the case and propose a somewhat particular compromise. That is, a Legion of Honor, awarded on a civil basis, with the awarding of the Croix de Guerre for acts of war. So Josephine Baker is a Knight of the Legion of Honor. Her merits are recognized by the Army, but through a somewhat peculiar legal construction.
Josephine waited until 1961 to receive the precious decoration.
This situation indeed reflects both everything she went through in her fight as a resistance fighter, but it also reflects what can be considered her fight against discrimination.
Josephine buys the chateau in 1947.
She buys it while going to see the notary during Joe Bouillon's absence.
She's always so generous. She's going to bring over her family, her sister Margaret, and her mom Carrie.
In Milan, Josephine found her haven of peace. She is opening a new chapter in her life.
After the war, my mother is not quite the same woman.
It's no longer the somewhat whimsical Josephine from the Roaring '20s, not at all. She has become a very profound woman.
She decides to roll up her sleeves. She tells herself, now I'm going to have a more activist, more committed life.
It's the beginning of an extraordinary adventure in a department, a region that is quite unknown, with a fabulous heritage.
She really wants to make Les Milandes an exceptional place. A place
At the time, it's important to know that there were fields here. They had the idea to create a kind of small amusement park, let's say.
She expanded her domain extraordinarily since she had 300 hectares of land. She buys the neighboring farm, which is magnificent. She buys the whole village. Her goal is to create an amusement park to revitalize the region.
And Josephine does not lack imagination. She has a gigantic leisure complex built, intended for both adults and children.
There was a slide, a swing, a small track with pedal cars. There was a paddling pool. There was a sandbox.
Everything was done to attract tourists.
By continuing, you have access to the pool.
J-shaped, really very, very beautiful, very impressive, which is the largest outdoor pool in the Aquitaine region.
The park was inaugurated on September 3rd, 1949, and quickly attracted thousands of visitors. But it was not created solely for tourism purposes.
The grand project is to bring people closer together. I want a village of love, a universal village, a village of brotherhood.
Some people will make fun of her, the capital of brotherhood. It seems utopian.
In reality, Josephine's utopia goes very far. In her mind, this park is only a beginning.
She wanted to create a gigantic international center in the area with huts, with cottages.
She wanted to build her fraternity school on top of the hill with a cable car that could go up there.
A great cultural and ethnic mix.
Bring students from all over the world who could be of all nationalities, of all religions.
It was free for all of them.
In 1947, Josephine crosses the Atlantic again.
And she returns to the United States, where she hasn't been since the 1930s.
She now thinks that the Americans saved Europe, and well, it's not possible that they continue to be segregationists.
She thinks that America has changed, and she is completely wrong.
The discriminatory patterns have not changed. Black people have to use service entrances to access certain places. Some buses or schools are off limits to them, as are other public places.
With Joe Bouillon in New York, she went to 36 hotels before finding one that accepted a black woman and a white man. The day she saw a sign that said no entry for Jews, for dogs and black people, for her, it was not possible.
But Josephine does not give up. 4 years after this cold shower, she tries her luck again.
In the United States, in 1951, she goes on a new tour. She thinks it's time to come back. So what's crazy is that she has considerable success. She is thrilled by the success she has in New York, and so she goes down to the southern United States.
But when she arrives, she notices that this bar is off limits to black people. Then she says no, this is no longer acceptable. She decides to turn down contracts.
In the United States, as long as black people cannot participate in concerts. Some venues that were segregationist are helping and allowing the black audience to enter or position themselves as they wish.
It's an encouraging initial success. Josephine gains the sympathy of all those fighting for equal rights, especially in New York's black neighborhood, Harlem.
And it's so crazy what's happening that Harlem is mobilized and going to defend Josephine. And that's how the Baker Day is going to be born, a day when black people will celebrate Josephine. And that day in 1951, she is celebrated as a woman who gave. Give those living in Harlem the right to exist, the right to be free.
She thinks she has already won a big victory.
But a few months later, she becomes disillusioned.
In New York, at a very famous and highly rated restaurant called the Store Club.
She wants to have dinner with friends who invited her. And after 1 hour, she hasn't been served. She quickly realizes that the servers actually don't want to serve her. And then she starts causing a scene.
There, I think she understood that the racial illness in the United States was an incurable and quite deep one.
Supporters are showing up for Josephine.
It is also she who called these associations to come and protest, who called the New York City Hall, who called lawyers, who stirred things up so that this incident would not go unnoticed.
And then, in this Store Club, someone is observing this very difficult scene. And this woman is Grace Kelly.
Grace Kelly will draw crazy admiration from this scene by saying, "If I were in her place, would I have done that?" There is also a journalist in the room.
Walter Winchell, who was an extremely influential journalist, she reproaches him for not defending her.
Winchell had always defended the black cause, so she thought maybe if I'm not being served because I'm black, maybe Winchell will step in.
And this journalist is going to write an article. And this article will turn against her. She will be called a communist.
In the 1950s, it was the era of McCarthyism.
It's the Cold War. America feels attacked by the communists, attacked from all sides.
Josephine, who talked about racial equality, was inevitably suspected of being a communist.
She even somewhat becomes the FBI's enemy.
She was very worried about the Ku Klux Klan. Several times when she was in the United States, she was harassed by these people who simply wanted her dead.
She ended up being unwelcome in the United States.
She returns to France convinced that something else needs to be done. That now her mission is to try to prove to the world that fraternity exists, that peoples can love each other, that there is only one race, the human race.
In Paris, a palace built for the Colonial Exhibition of 1931 allows for the evocation of Josephine's concrete actions, begun in 1953 under the banner of the LYCA, the International League Against Anti-Semitism, future LICRA.
We are here at the Palais de la Porte Dorée, which symbolizes the era in which she arrived, in the colonial France in which she arrived, and particularly this France that delivered representations of black people, as can be seen here in this building. And Josephine finally decided to turn to her advantage the racism she experienced both in the United States and in colonial Europe, which she had decided to join. We have gathered here all the activist activities of Josephine Baker that were featured in the Alika journal, Le Droit de Vivre, founded in 1932, which showcased all activist activities. And we see that Josephine was highly active from 1953 almost until her death in her fight against racism and anti-Semitism. So Josephine Baker was not just a decorative activist, she was truly committed to her fights against racism. She organized galas and meetings, and all the proceeds she could earn from her tours were entirely donated to Leica at the time. She was truly a selfless activist devoted to her cause. Her speeches were even published in the form of booklets that were distributed during her visits and served in a way as Josephine's doctrine, booklets all around the world to explain the message she wanted to convey.
First and foremost, she was an activist with an incredible talent for rallying crowds, inspiring other activists. When she spoke at the International League Against Racism and Anti-Semitism, in her many conferences, she had this strong phrase that said, "Let's not disappoint them, don't disappoint them."
But what distinguishes Josephine is that she doesn't stop at words. She is now determined to set an example.
Josephine Baker's activist work during that period went hand in hand with her concrete efforts at Les Milandes, where she very concretely showed, I am not here to make speeches like someone who is an international star. I show you what I can do at my level, with my family and with my children.
With Jo Bouillon, she had this fabulous idea to start a family. She couldn't have children, and Jo Bouillon agreed that Josephine could adopt 4 to 5 children.
A rainbow family, as all races and colors will be represented.
The first one will be Akio, and that is from 1953.
I'm going to show you something I really care about. These are the plane tickets that marked the beginning of my adventure here at Milandes. There are 3 plane tickets. It's funny, because the first one is in my mother's name, so Josephine Baker. The second one is in my name. But you will notice that it is not Akio Bouillon, it's baby Akio Yamamoto. Yamamoto is my original name. And then the third one is in the name of Kimura Teruya, who is my brother. Since Teruya was a bit complicated, it was changed to Chanut. These are relics, I would even say treasures. This is the beginning of the whole adventure. She led by example. She said, here you go, you have a role to play. You are my children. You come from totally different cultures and backgrounds. You are brothers and sisters now. You have to show people that you are capable of living together. And here, it's a success, because nowadays, we are a family.
Je m'appelle Akio, j'ai le vin et mon pays d'origine, c'est la Corée du Sud. Je m'appelle Charlie, j'ai 7 ans et mon pays d'origine, c'est le Vietnam. Je m'appelle Mariam, j'ai 5 ans et demi.
Et quel est ton pays d'origine?
C'est le Maroc.
Since 2001, Angélique de la Barre has restored, transformed into a museum, and opened the castle to the public. But for Marianne, it remains the house where she arrived in 1956, the first daughter of the Rainbow Tribe.
The room hasn't changed much. There's still a bit of its intimacy. It's strange to be back here after so many years, but it was the place where we all gathered at least 2 or 3 times a day.
Although there were 2 large dining rooms, we usually dined in the kitchen, almost like a peasant family. I especially remember Sunday evenings when the Sunday evening dish was spaghetti.
It was her specialty, but she was not an outstanding cook at all. But, well, it was still good. It was good. It was mostly because she wanted to be alone with us. So here we are in front of the first educational poster my parents put up to show us the names of fruits and animals. The big game was to be the first one to say the name of the animal or fruit.
The education was strict. It's before 68, so strict.
There was a strictness. For example, at the table, we learned to sit properly, upright, and only answer when we were spoken to. She was very, very strict about it, my father as well.
We did all sorts of silly things, and sometimes we were united. What usually happened was that the accounting office window was broken with a ball. It wasn't me, not me, not me, not me. So all the boys, you're all going to be punished, you know that, all of you, because of one of you. And once I heard her, and she was saying to her friends, "It drives me crazy. I can never find the culprit." But in reality, I never tell them, but I am very proud of them, because they all stand together. And that means that my family, my tribe, what I've tried to do, it's working, they are connected to each other, they never tell on each other, and I really like that.
Josephine demonstrated that fraternity was possible in her adopted country, but she still has America to convince. A major event will give her the opportunity.
In August 1963, Josephine Baker participated in the large meeting, the big gathering organized by Martin Luther King in Washington at the foot of the Lincoln Memorial.
She is asked to speak, and she is the only woman who will speak after Pastor Martin Luther King's famous "I Have a Dream" speech.
She arrived in her military uniform with all her medals.
And she will deliver to the crowd gathered here a message both as an ambassador of France, symbolic, but also as an ambassador of the Liga, of which she is still an active member. Josephine portrays the paradox of the United States in the 1960s, that of racism in American society. She explains in particular that while she could enter the palaces of kings and queens, in the offices of presidents, when she entered a hotel and wanted to have coffee there, she could not. It drove her mad.
She will talk about tolerance. She will talk about humanity. She will talk about brotherhood. She will talk about the foolishness of racism. And she will be applauded.
For her, it was essential to defend the civil rights of black people and to say, indeed, in my country, in France, we live in complete freedom.
Martin Luther King's widow asked her, after her husband's death, asked her to come co-lead the movement. And my mother said, "I can't. I'm in France. I have a family. I have children who are still young. I can't live in the United States."
In the late 1950s, Josephine starts having serious financial problems. She considers that stopping her career is not an option. She must continue. She sings at the Olympia in Paris, Mes Amours. She needs money.
In spring 1964, Josephine shows that even after 58 years, she hasn't lost any of her mischievousness.
Évidemment, des oranges merveilleuses. Tu veux, toi? Tiens. Regarde. Oh! Allez, attention, ça va venir. Ça va venir. Allez.
With this show, Josephine stays on the Olympia stage for 9 months, a record. However, despite this success, her home is gradually slipping away from her, as is her husband, Jo Bouillon.
My mother was an idealist, but sometimes she had delusions of grandeur.
And unfortunately, Jo Bouillon, he was grounded and he saw that his children were adorable, but that everything was very expensive and he could no longer afford it. So he asked her to put a stop to it.
My father didn't necessarily agree to adopt so many. At first, it was 2, 3, 4. Then she would come back with another one, a 5th, a 6th, a 7th. It was a done deal. She hadn't asked my father's opinion. She would say, "This one, I'm bringing it back. Ivory Coast, because his tribe was going to sacrifice him in the savannah." Yes, but finally, Joe, he didn't even ask me. But yes, do you think that over there from the savannah, I was going to ask you, your opinion? No, it had to be saved. I took it. I'm bringing it back. It's here. It's at rock bottom.
As she absolutely could not be reasoned with, he ended up giving up.
So he's the one who left for Argentina.
Despite this separation, Josephine eventually adopted 12 children, among them Noel, a baby abandoned in a trash can, and Stelina, the youngest one. But in 1969, a page turns. The Rainbow Tribe has to leave its Chateau de Milande.
One day, my mother told us we were going to leave, and I think that day, my brother Moses came back upset. He had seen foreigners in the park and told me, "Here they are. They're coming." And there was a kind of misunderstanding because, precisely, we had not been informed of Mom's financial difficulties, and then an unbelievable anger rose in us because we were at home. It was our house before it was a castle, and we claimed the right to stay there, actually. I said goodbye to all the trees. There were a lot more trees here before, and I said goodbye to them, telling myself I would never come back again. We had lost our little paradise.
Josephine moves to Paris, into a 2-room apartment near the Arc de Triomphe. It's not a triumph for her. The children are crammed in, and there's not much to eat. Then one day, she receives a visit from Jean-Claude Brialy. Jean-Claude Brialy, who has just taken over a cabaret in Paris, Le Goulou, and he offers Josephine to become the headliner of this cabaret.
It's a very small stage, but for her, it's a little bit of money that helps her support the family.
At the cabaret, Josephine meets André Levasseur, a decorator and costume designer, who is in charge of the Monaco French Red Cross Gala. He invites her to participate. In the summer of '69, Josephine and her tribe arrive on the Rock.
And she performs in front of Princess Grace and the reigning prince. Princess Grace has not forgotten that day when she attended the scene at the Stock Club. She knows how much Josephine is in misery, and she will arrange, through the Red Cross, for Josephine and her children to have a house next to Monaco in Roquebrune.
Roquebrune. Cap Martin. And it is Princess Grace herself who discreetly advances the funds to allow Josephine to buy this house.
She was very happy to have that life, to have a fixed point, no longer being with some people and others, and to have this foundation. But this foundation for her was a new beginning.
And so she was in a very positive mindset. She was looking forward more than backward.
The third son of Josephine, Louis, was 16 years old when the family arrived on the Côte d'Azur. This is the first time he's seeing his former house up close, which has now become a residence.
We were 11, plus my aunt and my uncle, and us, the boys, slept here, on this level. For me, it will always remain the family home. Even when I pass over it and look, it always touches my heart. Yes, it does.
To bring her new home to life, Josephine regularly goes on tour, but is always eager to return home, settle in the kitchen, and enjoy time with her loved ones.
She was a loving mother, always available. If we needed something, she was there to listen. And it's true that sometimes, in the evenings, we would sit around her bed, talking and all that. But we realized that she was tired, much more than before, after returning from her trip. And well, I admit that when there are 5 or 6 teenagers, it's not always easy to manage.
Like all teenagers, they wanted to go to parties and hang out with friends. There, she had a bit of trouble with them because she found it hard to imagine them leaving her authority.
We would tell her, "But you, Mom, when you were young, what about when I was young? First, you danced half-dressed and all. It's really you we saw on TV the day before yesterday." Sometimes we would tell her to come. "Here, Mom, come see yourself on TV. Oh no, that's not me. But yes, Mom, it's you. Young, dancing, and you seem to be having fun. And we are not allowed to do... No, that's a dancer, I'm telling you. I am your mother. I am a different woman.
Josephine takes her role as a mother very seriously and receives moral and financial support from Princess Grace. The two women have mutual admiration for each other and maintain a correspondence preserved in the archives of the Monaco Princely Palace.
Monte Carlo, August 25th, 1970. Dearest Princess Grace, by the end of September, God willing, I will have covered the 5 million old francs that you and your husband kindly advanced me. I received very pleasant letters from my 4 devils in England. They talk about their children. They have shown me everything you could say. I take the liberty of kissing our charming princess on both cheeks with all the affection I owe her, your sincere Josephine Baker. She is a woman who doesn't try to hide or mask the difficulties at the end of her life. She reflects on them a lot, is very exuberant. Ultimately, in her writing, we find her phrasing a unique artist.
With Princess Grace, the artist Josephine also mentions a project she keeps in mind concerning the country they have in common, the United States. After her triumph in the United States, Josephine is preparing a new show in Monaco. The title? Simply Josephine.
It was an idea to tell the entire life of Josephine Baker in a musical. When she was little in St. Louis, then arriving in New York, after La Revue Negre, after Latin America, the whole world. The war, of course.
Josephine has planned a series of particularly colorful paintings. The first performances are causing a sensation in the Principality.
And then Jean-Claude Brialy comes to see her and says, "But Josephine, now, it is time to really sing again in France, on a real Parisian stage."
At the time, it was difficult because many venues did not want Josephine Baker because first, the production was terribly expensive. They were not sure if people would show up. She had just had quite a few health problems, so they were afraid. And then Bobino opened its doors. "So," she said, "it's still the small door." And Jean-Claude replied, "But thanks to you, it will be the big one."
Old and decrepit, it's the Rive Gauche Hall, the recital hall of Brassens. It's not a show-off hall, it's not a review hall. In any case, Jean-Claude Brialy is going to do everything to make this return the Parisian event.
Behind the scenes, it's Olivier Échaud Maison, the current creative director of Guerlain, who is hired to do Josephine Baker's makeup.
I met her, and I was quite amazed to meet a legend. Josephine was tired. She was exhausted from rehearsals. She dozed off during my work. So, since she had this somewhat tired face, her eyes swollen and very dark circled with heavy eyelids, I had to find a trick. And the thing was not to stick glitter, but to stick rhinestones. That is to say, it can be seen from the other end of the Pobino room, that it catches the light very strongly like that, and you can see their eyes, the gaze, their smile, their mouth. And when I said to her, "Josephine, I'm done," she woke up, shook herself and saw herself. She was so happy, she suddenly felt 40 years younger in her mind. She got out of the chair, stood up from the chair, and started dancing.
The premiere of Josephine takes place on April 8, 1975.
Peut-être vieilli, mais il n'est pas dit encore que moi je flanche. Et peut-être, qui sait, je finirai ma vie sur les planches.
Doesn't it feel a bit strange to see your life story on stage?
No, it's nice. Because at least I see what people think of me while I'm alive. What a joy for me to come back.
All of Paris was there. No one was missing. All the celebrities.
The Princess of Monaco, the King of Morocco.
Sophia Loren, Alain Delon. I can't name all the people Brioly had invited.
The last phone call we had was, "My darling, at the premiere, there was Mick Jagger." It's Mick Jagger, unbelievable, from the Stones. But here, he was with my mom. You see that your mom isn't so old-fashioned with her shows.
She came to the first row, then the second row, to talk to the spectators, to sit on the gentleman's knees, you know, like that. And she giggled. She laughed. And the guys, they were all so friendly. But it was fantastic.
Paris, Paname, Paris, Paname.
I was happy for her, really happy, because she had achieved what she wanted.
In the audience, another spectator does not hide her joy. She has not forgotten that in 1959, Josephine Baker handed over to her as the lead performer at the Casino de Paris. It is Lynn Renaud.
I learned a lot from her. She came to rehearse with me every day the staircase descent until I was completely comfortable. For me, it was a challenge. That's why I listened to all of Josephine's advice. She gave me lots of little tips. She had extraordinary charisma. She fascinated me in any scene. She was unpredictable. She was funny. She was above all funny.
She will perform about 17 shows, almost one every night. We feel that she is tired, but she doesn't show it on stage. And on April 9th, 1975, her 50-year career is celebrated at the Hotel Bristol in Paris. So all her friends are there. She is very happy, and then she returns to the apartment she is renting in Paris at that time.
She went to bed, fell asleep, and then in the morning, she didn't wake up, and actually, she had fallen into a coma.
Jean-Claude Brioly calls me. He says, "Come quickly to the hospital. Josephine is dying." We looked at her. We talked to her. We couldn't hear her. She breathed her last breath, a deep breath, and she was gone. To me, it was striking to have seen her 3 days before. Amazing. Meters of her movements, meters of giving in, walking, dancing, and seeing 2 days later, a disjointed puppet. That shocked me very much.
In any case, I told myself, well, this time, now, there was no miracle. It's over. We won't see her again.
On the morning of April 15th, 1975, all of Paris said goodbye to Josephine.
And she is the only French female artist to have had military and national funerals, which is quite extraordinary for a little girl from Missouri.
Princess Grass then had her buried in the Monaco cemetery on October 2nd. Josephine Baker leaves a world she had forced herself to make better all her life.
There is one thing that remains throughout his life, his tremendous energy.
She never gave up at any moment in her life. She was a woman of great freedom.
She represented France in a fantastic way.
When you look back at all the battles of Josephine Baker, you must add her to the great women whom the nation recognizes with gratitude. Let's erect the statue of Josephine Baker. Let's have her enter the Pantheon.